What up, YouTube? Here with a post-fight video of the Vergil Ortiz versus Serhii Bohachuk fight. Now, before I give you the summary of what happened in the fight, I'm going to tell you the results first. This fight ended in a majority decision win for Vergil Ortiz. Vergil Ortiz still remains undefeated. This was his first fight going the distance, all 12 rounds, and I personally had this fight scored a draw, 113 each. And that's because there were two knockdowns that happened in the fight in the favor of Serhii Bohachuk when he was able to drop Vergil Ortiz in the first round and in the 8th round. And those weren't significant knockdowns. Those were flash knockdowns where Ortiz wasn't hurt by those knockdowns. He seemed to have lost his footing, hence why he hit the canvas. And there was a first time ever thing that I've never witnessed throughout all the years that I've watched boxing. And because the first knockdown that occurred in the first round officially wasn't ruled a knockdown, it was ruled a slip when it happened right then and there. But after the 4th round, the referee had gotten news from ringside officials that looked over the tape. And now that technology has advanced, I guess officials outside the rings can overlook the tapes during the midst of the fight and alter the referee's decision. I don't know if it's a rule that has been chimed in, and it depends on which state the fight is being hosted at. I know this fight was in Vegas, and I don't know what made the officials outside the ring tell the referee after 3 rounds has passed. And if I look at that knockdown over again, I'm talking about the first one that wasn't called right then and there, it was a knockdown, and they did technically make the right call because Bohachuk did land a straight right hand that floored Ortiz. It looked as if Ortiz tangled his foot, but a punch did land. Hence why it was the right call on the part of the officials that was outside of the ring that had told the referee that was officiating this fight to call it a knockdown, even though he had ruled it a slip when it had happened. And in the 8th round, there was no controversy at all because Ortiz got caught with another straight right hand that he did not see coming. And like the first knockdown, he wasn't hurt by that knockdown. He was more frustrated that he got caught with a shot that he did not see coming. And it was more like a flash knockdown that didn't damage him. And he got back up on his feet, and all that did was light a fuel under him to get him on fire, and then he would go on to win the rest of the round because that had turned up the heat, and that brought the aggression out of Ortiz, and Ortiz brought that fight and brought that pressure and that work rate and that volume and those power shots to Bohachuk to make up for that second knockdown that had happened, that occurred in the 8th round. And how this fight went, the beginning half was all Ortiz. How I had the first round scored was in favor of Ortiz, but because the referee had gotten the news that the officials went over the tape and had said that it was a knockdown, I had to score the first round 10-8 for Bohachuk instead of Ortiz. But all 6 rounds, the beginning half of the fight was all Ortiz. Ortiz, from the sound of the bell, we know he's a quick starter. He doesn't take much to start his onslaught. He is a pressure fighter, a power puncher. Mind you, out of all the reputable fighters, he, before this fight, had 100% knockout ratio with all his victories coming by way of knockout. And this was his first fight ever that went to the scorecards. And if it wasn't for those two knockdowns, I would have had this fight score 115 to 113 in favor of Ortiz. I had this fight still scored, regardless of the fact that I had it 113 apiece, 7 rounds to 5 in favor of Ortiz. And Ortiz, he fought his regular fight, and that's him coming forward, bringing the pressure, bringing the onslaught, being aggressive, working off of volume, hoping to land a significant blow that will finish his opponent, because Ortiz has made a reputation out of being a killer. And much credit to Bohachuk for him being able to go the distance with Ortiz. The best punch for Bohachuk was the jab, followed up by the straight right. That 1-2 was working very well. Well, not very well, but it was the best offense, the best neutralizer for Bohachuk for the entirety of the fight. That was what gave Bohachuk the break, that 1-2. And mind you, both knockdowns happened because of that straight right hand that Bohachuk snuck in there, while Ortiz got too offensively minded. And Bohachuk, he did a good job at being reserved, being defensively minded, having his guard up tight, and his punch placement was impressive as well. And if y'all look at the stats of both fighters before heading into this fight, Bohachuk, just like Ortiz, has made a reputation out of being a knockout artist. Bohachuk only had one prior defeat where he got stopped before, and he only had one win that he still has on his record, because this was a defeat that he suffered tonight versus Ortiz. All his wins other than one came via knockout TKO stoppages. Hence why this fight was advertised and was hyped upon and looked forward to by the fans as a promoted, expected slugfest. But this fight, as competitive as this fight wasn't really a slugfest throughout the entirety of the fight, because Ortiz was slugging a lot more than Bohachuk was. Bohachuk wasn't as engaging as Ortiz was. He wasn't exchanging as much. He was backpedaling. He was fighting off his back foot more. As I had mentioned before, he was fighting a much more defensive fight than Ortiz. Ortiz was a lot more offensive-minded, and Bohachuk had to have his guard up, and he didn't have a lot of opportunity to throw as much as Ortiz was. And as I said, Bohachuk, he would sneak in punches when there were rooms of opportunity, and he would look for counter opportunities whenever he found opportunity where Ortiz wasn't stepping fully on the gas pedal. And whenever there would be punch spaces for Bohachuk to fit in his shots during the onslaught that Ortiz was bringing his way. And Bohachuk, as I had said, prior to this fight, other than the avid followers of the sport, he didn't have much of a reputation, despite the fact that he was the champion. heading into this fight. This was for the interim WBC super welterweight title, and Ortiz is regarded as the number one ranked contender according to the WBA. That title is currently held by Terence Crawford, as he defeated Israel Madrimov last week. And now that Ortiz got a victory over on Bohachuk and now is the interim WBC super welterweight champion, that makes him the mandatory challenger for the title, the WBC title, which is held by Sebastian Fundora, who's going to be fighting Errol Spence in November of this year for both the WBC and WBO super welterweight title. And Ortiz, even though he's the mandatory challenger for the WBC title, he's still the number one ranked contender for the WBA title, even though he doesn't have an official WBA title last time that I checked. And from the status that I saw for Ortiz heading into this fight, and he wasn't announced as the interim WBA champion for the introduction of this fight, and that's why I'm confident at the fact that Ortiz doesn't have a WBA title under him, but he's still the number one ranked contender for the super welterweight division according to the WBA. And if Ortiz does in fact get a title shot versus Terence Crawford, it would be a good look for both Ortiz and Crawford. Now, does this worry me if I'm speaking on the behalf of Vergil Ortiz after his performance versus Serhii Bohachuk? Now, Vergil Ortiz, he doesn't have that much experience overall, nor does he have a lot of experience when it comes to him competing at 154. So it's not like he has that weight advantage over on Terence Crawford when it comes to fighting at 154, nor does he have that much of a experience advantage when it comes to competing at 154. Terence Crawford made his debut at 154 last week when he fought Israel Madrimov. Now can Ortiz, now that he went the distance for the first time in his career and was successful, can he get in there with somebody as consistent and as experienced and as skilled as Terence Crawford and fare well against him? And he made technical errors in this fight versus Bohachuk, where he got caught with counter shots that wasn't that damaging, but he could have avoided. A fighter that is as sharp and aware as a Crawford, he can't make those technical mistakes versus a fighter that possesses the skills like a Crawford. And of course, Ortiz can have time to prepare and have himself trained in preparation for Terence Crawford if that fight is next for both Crawford and Ortiz. And Ortiz has been an ideal candidate opponent for Terence Crawford even when they were both competing at 147. This fight has been talked about because of how Ortiz was able to collect his wins. As I said, he had all his fights prior to this fight win via knockout. And he did it in emphatic fashion. Terence Crawford hasn't fought a fighter that has the power that Ortiz does. He fought Errol Spence and Sean Porter, yes, but those guys didn't have 100% knockout ratio like a Ortiz does. Porter did have that aggression. They did have some similarities, did Ortiz and Porter, but I say Porter is much more fundamentally sound than Ortiz is. And Errol Spence didn't make a reputation out of being a knockout artist and a pressure volume puncher and a workhorse. Errol Spence made a reputation out of being a rangy, lengthy fighter that is technically sharp and sound and that breaks his opponents down. Ortiz is a sheer, aggressive, pure volume puncher with knockout power. And in this fight, he did show that he has room for improvement to get better when it comes to fundamentals. And I say he's still a little too green to take on a fighter that is on the level of a Terence Crawford. And Ortiz, I can say, after assessing his performance tonight, he'd be better off fighting more contenders that are not a champion, that is not a champion. Let me fix my grammar there right quick. That are considered to be high-ranked contenders. I don't think he's ready for a title shot yet. I don't think he's experienced enough to get in there with a Terence Crawford. Maybe a Sebastian Fundora, I can say. And then there's the IBF Super Welterweight champion as well, Bakram Murtazaliyev, who's undefeated. And I don't know what his promotional deal is right now as far as Murtazaliyev goes. I don't even know if Ortiz is ready for Murtazaliyev, as technically sound Murtazaliyev is. And then there are fighters that fight at a elite level as super welterweight, like a Tim Tszyu, who was supposed to fight Vergil Ortiz on the undercard of Crawford and Madrimov, and that fight got canceled because Tim Tszyu had to pull out of that fight. I think he got injured during his preparation for his fight versus Vergil Ortiz. Now, that would be a heck of a fight. And then there's Jermell Charlo in the mix as well. And then Jermell Charlo, now that he's going to be competing at 154 again, and he's been off for almost a year now, and who knows when Jermell Charlo is going to fight next. But Jermell Charlo, he's with PBC, as is Sebastian Fundora, and as is Errol Spence. As far as Terence Crawford goes, he's a freelancer when it comes to the promotional side of things. And then there is also Tim Tszyu, who is, I believe, a freelancer, just like Terence Crawford is. And Tim Tszyu, if he was supposed to fight Vergil Ortiz, that fight was supposed to be broadcasted on the Zone. And Tim Tszyu, we're used to seeing them fight on PBC. And I don't know what the promotional deal is with Tim Tszyu right now. I know he has his own promotion like Terence Crawford does. And Israel Madrimov, I believe he's promoted by Top Rank. And then there's also fighters that's considered to be highly ranked amongst the top of the super welterweights, like Jack Coquet. There's also veterans like Erickson Lubin, Tony Harrison, Brian Castano, Jesus Ramos, Charles Conwell, who's unbeaten as well. His last fight was broadcasted on the Zone. That was on the undercard to Ryan Garcia versus Devin Haney. And if Vergil Ortiz was supposed to step in there with any of these names, those would be lucrative fights for Vergil Ortiz to get in with any of these names if he doesn't get a title shot versus Terence Crawford. And Vergil Ortiz has been calling out Crawford for a while now, and because Crawford made his debut on the zone, that fight doesn't seem too far off. Now, is Vergil Ortiz ready for a fighter like Terrence Crawford, who is, at least on my pound for pound ranking, the best fighter in the world right now? And how I saw Vergil Ortiz slow down during the latter rounds, because prior to going all 12 rounds in this fight, the longest fight that he's ever competed in was for 9 rounds. And now that he went the distance, we saw where his stamina and his conditioning and his durability is at. He's got those things to work on, and it was the later rounds where Bohachuk started to find success versus Vergil Ortiz. And Vergil Ortiz, he doesn't want to get too carried away, and he wants to learn how to reserve his energy and how to properly portion his energy for his stamina's sake, for his future when he competes at a higher level. And now that he's an interim champion now, this, I believe, is his only 3rd fight at super welterweight. Now that he's gaining more experience, these are some fundamentals that Ortiz and his camp is going to want to work on. And he does have the right team to get him to that championship level. And now that Ortiz can have a fight versus a lesser known opponent like Serhii Bohachuk, and I mean that with all due respect, he fought at Mandalay Bay, which is a legendary arena when it comes to not only boxing but combat sports, and he did a good amount of ticket sales, as he always does. And for him to have a headliner fight with a not so stacked undercard, and for him to have a fight at a venue like that that is outside of his home state of Texas, is a good look. And I did mention this during my post-fight video for the Crawford-Madrimov fight, that Ortiz, as far as drawing ability goes, is up there with Terrence Crawford. So if they were to fight sometime next year, that would be a good look for both fighters, because as far as marketability goes, I can put them in the same category. And as far as Madrimov goes, he can perhaps be a good tough test for Vergil Ortiz in his next fight if he doesn't get a fight versus Terrence Crawford next. And as far as a rematch for Ortiz and Bohachuk, I think it would be just for Bohachuk's part, because I personally at this fight scored a draw, as did one of the official judges. And this being a majority decision win for Ortiz, and Bohachuk having 2 knockdowns scored in this fight, he does have a strong contention for a possible rematch versus Vergil Ortiz. And because of how exciting and how fan-friendly of a fight this fight was, I'm quite sure the fans who got to witness this bout wouldn't mind seeing another fight with Ortiz and Bohachuk. And for Bohachuk, if he's to fight Madrimov, that would also be a good fight as well. I think Madrimov, with the technical skills that he possesses, it would be a very tough fight for both fighters, Ortiz and Bohachuk. And as far as this fight goes, I say it was one of the better fights that I saw this year. It was very fan-friendly style of a fight. And that's all I gotta say for this post-fight video, y'all. Subscribe to this channel for more content. And if y'all like this video, hit the like button, hit the share button, click the links in the description to show y'all support for this channel. Anything will be appreciated. And with that being said, I'm out. Be good and peace.